40 Years on the Wild Side is the story of discovery, freedom, and the adventures of Terence and Ina Cotton. It's a story of how it all started and led to over 40 years of overlanding throughout southern Africa, and more trips than I can recall. Hello and welcome to the Overland Legend. I'm Alan. This is the fourth episode of 40 Years on the Wild Side. In this last episode of the series, my dad tells us about the 1990s and the trips that they did in restored Series 2A Caboose Land Rovers, like this one that I'm standing in. And then he also tells us about an epic trip, that Southern African tour that they did in a Series 1 88-inch that he had restored. If you haven't seen those first few episodes of this series, you must go and watch them. They're on the links are in the description below. But let's get back into the story as my dad tells us about these Caboose campers that they converted, and then we get into those stories. So let's join Terry now.
In the late 80s and early 90s, the Army auctioned off a lot of Land Rovers, which they had used mainly for officers. These vehicles were Series 2 Land Rovers from about 1967. They had extended chassis and tall bodies, and were ideal for converting into campers. Most of them had done less than 3,000 kilometers, and went on auction for 1,500 to 2,500 rand. We bought several of them, two of which we converted into two-berth campers. We have now fitted an overdrive and a TDI engine to the one we are using at present.
Okay, here I am with Brian, who's an integral part of the story, and you've seen him in the story. And this episode obviously is a lot about these Caboose vehicles, and Brian actually just came across one of these vehicles. So I thought, well, let's just have a quick chat about these vehicles, and maybe we can also just talk a little bit about the two that mom and dad had. So the first one was that brown one. That was just a regular 2.25.
Yeah, they were available in the Army, and they look pretty much like this one does. So we got the 2.25. That's what they came out with. 2.25 petrol. They were all 2.25 petrol. So they bought that one, and at the time we were selling the Ford Control, which was the family camper, and we went to the 2.25 Caboose, which was actually officers. They were officers. They had a huge steel drawer system up in the back, and a chair basically, and the officers used them as an office, and that's what it was. As a result, they were very little used. They didn't go very far, they didn't do a lot of work. It was not necessary, they never went to much service. So that's it. So yeah, we bought that. Mainly they had a aluminium body on a steel frame, on a steel structure, and it made a great camper for two people. And that was a 2.25. We built it, our folks built it, and the moment it was ready, they packed it up and went off to Botswana on holiday, and worked like a charm.
So we've got a lot of, so some of the trips that we did were in that first one, the brown, we call it the brown Caboose.
Yes.
And then they had that for a long time, and we were actually just talking now, and we can't remember why did they get another one, but they got another one which was then the green Caboose. But I think it was probably to put another engine in and to make it a bit more, sort of a bit faster, I guess.
Yeah, obviously being the 2.25 with all your stuff in is not the fastest thing. So I think it was a combination of possibly there was a market, people started seeing them being nice campers, and that's about the time when the Falcon turbo diesels were coming out onto the market. Well, coming out of the early 110s, and we were all getting them, putting them in, and it was a great upgrade, you know, fuel consumption and power. So I think the green Caboose was built as the Falcon up front, right from day one. Pulled the motor out and built the vehicle from day one as the Falcon powered motor. You were building your green, I was building mine.
Yeah, in my camper I had the Falcon, and you were the first one to put yours, and then I put one in, and then they had it in the Caboose.
Correct,
but then you were saying that eventually that engine failed.
Yeah, so that did, it travelled around for a long time, and then it failed on a trip down to the Cape. And that is the point anyway we had decided well, we're going to do away with that engine because it was now tired, and we were going to do a 300.
Okay, and then you put the 300
So then
TDI in.
we trucked it back again from the Cape back here, and then we put the 300 into it with a series gearbox and overdrive still. So the same transmission, but the 300, that was great.
That went
beautiful.
well.
Yeah,
and I mean,
amazingly,
I saw that on Facebook like a couple of months ago.
Yeah, it was
advertised. It's still there, still running. So
I was actually going to buy it. Before I found this one, I was
Yeah.
looking to buy that one, but it was complete, exactly like we sold it. Everything was still in it. It was still there, and it was still running. So that was great. And a testament for a half decent job. So yeah. Anyway, so that was the green Caboose.
So okay, so now what we'll let's rejoin that story, and my dad tells us about some of those trips that they did in the brown Caboose.
Our trips to Botswana were becoming less frequent. In the late 1980s, the authorities incorporated Chiefs Island and nearby islands into Moremi and increased the park fees substantially. This did not surprise us, as South Africans had discovered Botswana as a cheap holiday destination. On our last visit to Moremi with our boats, we were amazed to see how busy it was at Third Bridge. We were thus more than pleased to accept an invitation from Frank Dandridge to join him and his son Colin, together with the Becks, the Crossmans and the Plunketts, on a trip into a hunting concession area northwest of Moremi, in a section of the Okavango Delta not open to the public. Alan and Brian, with friend Dave Cochran, made up our party. There were 7 assorted vehicles on the trip, our son Alan driving one of Colin's forward controls, loaded with a boat, outboard motors and fuel. We collected another boat somewhere in the bush, where Colin kept it hidden away. The second day saw us negotiating many streams and doing a fair bit of cross-country travel. We stopped several times to cool off in small lagoons with sandy bottoms, a precaution against attack from crocodiles. It was one of these stops that Dave said to Alan, "Now I know why you drive a Land Rover." He has since become a keen Land Rover owner. That night we set up camp on a large open area with plenty of shaded trees next to a large lagoon. We spent several days there, including Christmas Day, which was celebrated in the evening with a combined dinner and much wine.
I want a yo-yo.
Rosemary stuck in your teeth. I'll stick my teeth in the road.
The next morning an early riser woke everyone with the news that a pride of lions had been through the camp. Some of us, some with lesser or greater hangovers than others, led by Colin, immediately followed their tracks in our vehicles. After tracking them for well over an hour through the bush and across the veld, we eventually gave up. We saw a lot of game on the trip, including a very large herd of wildebeest. Although the animals were docile, this herd was spooked by us and took off at a gallop across the vast plain in a cloud of dust. Quite an experience. This sadly was to be our last trip with Frank and Aileen. On New Year's Eve we left the Dandridges and headed for Baines Baobabs along a seldom used track recommended by Colin. The war in Mozambique persisted for a couple years after the other communist-inspired conflicts had stopped. In 1993, we learned from Ina's mother that a lot of people from the Lowveld were venturing forth into Mozambique. We obtained our visas, loaded up our Series 2 long wheelbase, now called the Green, after a rebuild in the late 1980s, and after picking up Ina's mom, headed for Ponta de Ora. The road gradually deteriorated with more and more landmine craters. There were many vehicle wrecks along the side of the road. The going was very slow, and we were forced to overnight on a farm run by a South African under a long-term concession. We spent one night at the campsite Ponta de Ora. As we were not happy with the bright lights, switched on all night and loud music played from the restaurant, we left the next morning to look for a better place. We found a place in some trees for the night. The next day we headed to Shai, where we set up camp on a beach under some trees, as the campsite was too disgusting to stay in. Except for a bit of pilfering one night, we had no problem staying there for the rest of the week. On the way home we decided to avoid Maputo and most of the terrible road to the border by going through Magude and Maomba. We have had many trips to Mozambique since 1993. Many changes took place over the years. We camped on the beach at Barra Falsa with our sons and their friends one year. The authorities soon banned this type of camping, and we were forced to use campsites. However, on one occasion with the Becks, we spent 1 or 2 nights camping in the dunes south of Inhambane. We decided for the rest of that holiday to stay at Coconut Bay campsite, which in fact had no facilities and consisted of broken down buildings. There was a toilet in one of the buildings, but this had a very large tree growing in the pan. We stayed at Ponta Malangane, now rebuilt on 2 occasions. The first time we were able to travel up the beach to Ponta Shemakan. Shortly after this, driving on the beach was prohibited. No narrative of mine would be complete without a mention of the Land Rover 50th anniversary tour of 1998. The aim of the tour was to bring together as many Land Rover enthusiasts as possible. The tour, organized by Ina and Brian Hogg of the Cape Land Rover Club, covered 9,500 kilometers through South Africa, Swaziland and Lesotho over 9.5 weeks. 9 vehicles did the entire trip, most of us having retired recently, with another 140 spending more than 2 nights on the tour. About 150 joined the party for a day. The tour was joined by 3 Land Rover owners and their wives from America, Wales and Holland, the former 2 with their own vehicles. We did the entire tour in our 1957 Series 1 88-inch, which I had recently rebuilt.
I was lucky enough to join a part of this tour in the Transkei and the Eastern Cape. On that trip I had a chance to interview my mom and dad about the trip.
How have you found the trip so far? Has it worked out well, your plans?
Oh yes, most of it. The 2 bits that didn't work out well was the weather.
Yeah.
Once we had solid mist in Shishlabatevi, and the other time we had solid wind, as you know, the other day.
Yeah.
But I think all in all, just the 2 days out of a total of 4 weeks is not bad.
That's excellent. What part of the trip have you enjoyed the most?
I think probably the crossing of the Sutu. It was really rough. The most disgusting roads has had my pleasure to drive.
And how's your vehicle held up?
Excellently, I'm absolutely thrilled with it.
How old is your vehicle?
41 years now.
And when did you restore it?
Restored it over the previous 3 years. Finished it in September last year. Basically for this trip. Took us a couple of months to build up the inside because we had to try and fit in as much as we could into a very small space. And I think we've done quite well there.
Has this given you an opportunity to see South Africa all over again and in a different light?
Yes, certainly it has, because we've been to some spots that we haven't been to before. Not very many of those. The Shihlani Game Reserve in Swaziland is a very pleasant little spot where one can quite easily go and spend a week or so.
There was Murray's Farm with
Right,
the
Murray's
river that
Farm
we had
as
to
well.
cross. That was fun and that was great and new.
Water pouring in up to the dash into the
Floorboards.
Oh,
floorboards.
lovely.
So that was quite exciting, and I think a lot of the people on the trip have really had their first experience of proper off-roading. We were
I've done a full 3-part video series on this 50th anniversary tour, so if you haven't seen it, make sure that you check it out on my channel.
In 2000, we organized a trip through Botswana and Namibia. Several of the people who had participated in the 50th tour joined this tour, including Daniel and Julia from America and Pim, Kilen and Tundi from Holland. The route took us via Maun and Shakawe into Namibia at Mohambo. We travelled on back roads to Opowa, avoiding towns except to get fuel. The route took us along the Omatako riverbed in the northeast and a cut line along the top fence of Etosha. From Opua we went to Mpembe, to the Kunene, and travelled along the difficult and stony but picturesque road to Epupa Falls. We noticed how the Himba had become less shy and the teenagers more demanding since our visit to the Kaokaveld 11 years earlier. We returned to Opua to refuel before heading south to Etosha. Leaving Etosha, my back differential disintegrated when a broken bolt punctured the casing and all the oil ran out. In Ochu, the nearest town, we located a Land Rover enthusiast and were able to get a replacement differential for my Series 2 vehicle. From Ochu to Quiriakas, the Burnt Mountain, Brandberg West and the Skeleton Coast, we went to Swakopmund and Sossusvlei, travelling along tracks and riverbeds where possible. We crossed back into Botswana at Buitepos border post and turned down the first road south, which would take us via Mabua Suhube Game Reserve to the border. This was to be our last trip to Botswana. Our sons were joining us more and more often with their vehicles. We had several trips to the Transkei, normally to Shixini near Willowvale. We also had trips to the West Coast and the Richtersveld. On one of these trips, the gearbox of Brian's Series 3 gave problems. He removed the box and identified the problem. He and I left early the next morning with Clive Crossman in his 90 for Port Nolloth, the nearest town. No one could help us in the town, but we were given directions to a Land Rover enthusiast about 30 kilometers out of town. There we were able to find the necessary bits and pieces. The gearbox was repaired and welded together and refitted that night.
Okay, this is another great example of just fixing stuff on the road, and luckily I've got Brian right here, and he was the one in that video, and he had obviously had that gearbox problem. So just tell us about that Richtersveld trip and specifically that gearbox problem. Like, what was the problem and how did you solve it?
Yeah, so you know, back in the days we were still learning to do this thing. We went to Richtersveld and outside Joburg, about 100 kilometers outside Joburg, heading towards Bloemfontein, we stopped at a stop street and the vehicle just locked up solid, solid, like engine stalled it, just no move. So I thought, okay, now what the hell do I do now? So reversed a bit and fiddled it, and it went. Thought, well, to hell with it, I'm not going to stop. We're on holiday, you know, we're going to go. So we went, and we drove all the way to Ice. That's where we met up. We met up with
Clive.
with Clive and with my parents.
Yes.
With the parents.
Yes, okay.
So we driving them. We drove there. It was fine, not a problem. Ice, it was all great. There's this thing in the back of your head that says, you know, there's something interesting happened, but we don't care, so we're just going to go on with it. So we carried on, and when we got to Richtersveld proper, and it's up and down and up and down, driving up the hill, and it looked good. You know, it was off-road. We were driving off-road, and then going down the hill. At one point, going down the hill, the vehicle locks up solid. Now we're in the Richtersveld, okay? So what do? Like, oh shit, this is a problem, because you don't like towing a vehicle away or anything. So I can't remember what I did. I think I selected reverse or something, and I managed to get it out of gear, put it in transfer box neutral, and I freewheeled down the hill. So it's just a plain freewheel down the hill, and get it, and at the bottom of the hill, it all works again. Cool. So we go again. So we select and we go up the hill, and then we discovered, okay, on the downhill, the whole vehicle locks up solid. The transmission doesn't move. Put in the clutch, it doesn't move. Put it in transfer box low range, put it transfer box neutral, and it's free. Anyway, so we sort of drive up freewheel down the hills until we get to a campsite. So we've got to fix this thing. So
It was a nice campsite in the video, because you spent a couple of days there. Obviously.
It wasn't. Luckily, it was a nice campsite. And it was away from the river and things, so we were okay. So we. Let's see, what did we do? I had made, when I built the vehicle, I made the cross member come out the bottom, so I didn't have to take the
I noticed that, because you took it out, and the video you're obviously putting it in from the bottom, so that was a bonus.
But you still have to disassemble the whole inside. So we disassembled the inside, put the high lift jack, tied 2 high lift jacks onto it, either with bolts across through the open doors and over the top of the roof. So you now got a bar and snatched ratchet straps, and we took the gearbox out, loaded out, stuck it in the back of Clive Crossman's D90, and we headed off to Port Nolloth. So it's out of the Richtersveld all the way to Port Nolloth. So we get there, and as things have it, it was more than likely a Saturday afternoon. It's always going to be a weekend when this sort of thing happens. It's always after midday, Saturday or a Sunday, and that's just the rule. So we ask around and we ask around. Eventually we find a place, and this oak drives a ADE R6, or at least a Series 3S ADE. And he's got another Land Rover in a corner, and this is a Land Rover. Actually, we thought, right, we got the right place. So we go to him and we say, listen, we got this gearbox and it's broken, and we don't have any tools. Well, we've got tools, but we've got no way to fix it. So he says, okay, cool, let's have a look. So we had already established that the shaft on the end of the main, the nut on the end of the main shaft had come loose, and it had mangled the thread and itself, and that had come loose. So what was happening is the main shaft was drifting forwards on a downhill and selecting 2 gears at the same time, and obviously that won't work. When you go up the hill then and you put load on the box, then it pushes the shaft to the back and everything works fine. So that was basically the situation. So the guy said, yes, sure, he's got a nut like that. So he points to the corner of his workshop where there's a 44-gallon drum, one of those 220-litre drums, 3/4 full with nuts and bolts. He says there's one in there. So we sort of see the next 3 weeks of digging through this drum. Anyway, we throw the drum over and we start digging, and about an hour later we find said nut, which doesn't really screw onto the thread anyway, because the thread's stuffed. But it's at least roughly the same size. So, and this is a big oak. So what we ended up doing is the gears were okay. So we put it all together. It seemed fine, and we tightened it up as best we could and chiseled it on, because it's not really a nut. Until it was on, and then just welded it onto the main shaft, just for good measure, because that sucker's not got to come off now. And that was that. And we got back late at night. We actually got back to the campsite. It was dark. So this was doing all those little routes in the middle of the night. We got there. It was quite late. It was like 9:30 or something. Because when you're out there, you have to do the job, and if it's late, it's late. That's just what it is. So we got back next morning. We unloaded and we put the whole thing in, and it worked like a charm. There was no problem.
There was no...
Yeah, popped it all together again, problem was solved, and we carried on with our holiday.
Yeah.
Yeah, we wouldn't want to turn around when we found the fault, and it wasn't that bad, and it's just one of those things, you just do that, because it's fixable.
Yeah.
Well, obviously when we came home, I cut the shaft off and I put a new shaft in. But for the rest, it was fine, and luckily there was no other damage.
Yeah.
But it was one of those faraway breakdowns.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're not into towing vehicles home.
No, then the rest of that trip was also quite interesting, because it looked like there was quite a bit of rain.
Yes.
And this, it is washed.
And some of that video, and I know, you get some real flash floods there, so you encountered quite a bit of water in the desert.
Yeah, no, there was water. There was a lot of water. You go to the desert to go and look at the desert, and then you'll end up driving through wet roads.
Yeah.
It's not Botswana, it's a desert. And flowers and greenery. It wasn't fully flowers, so it wasn't the traditional flowers that you get there, but it was wet and green for the desert. So that's a bit odd.
Yeah.
But we also knew about the concept of don't camp in a riverbed, even though they're the flattest place, because everything else is like this.
Yeah.
We camped on the nasties, and it rained that night, and you stand there and you watch the dry riverbed, and you go get a cup of coffee, you come back and there's a raging torrent, and you know that's what I mean. There's enough videos to show people getting caught in it. But yes, and it happened when we were there. You could clearly see, and it didn't rain where we were. It wasn't really raining where we were. It rained somewhere else.
Yeah,
and
you
that's
just
the
saw
bit
the water.
that catches you.
Yeah, because you don't realize it's raining. I never thought of that.
Yeah, no, you don't know. You think it's not raining. There's no, it's not saying it's going to rain, but it rained over there. And the water's got nowhere else to go, because in Namibia and in the Richtersveld and those areas, the rivers actually flow, but under the surface. If you dig a hole in any riverbed, there's water about 1 meter down. You can find water. So you just got to add a little bit of water, then you've got a flowing river. It doesn't sink away, it actually flows quickly. And that's the problem. You don't know it happens. And it's lucrative and smooth and lovely, and it's nice and quiet and calm, and particularly dangerous. Yeah. So that's no. There was a lot of water. But still, obviously, it was great fun.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was, that's the sort of one of those really interesting trips, and it's nice that, Brian and I have been on some of those from when we were small, obviously, and then now, when we were bigger, we were able to go on some of those. So it's
less than we should
really
have.
Nice. Yeah, less than we should have.
I've got to catch up. Alan's ahead of me. I've got to catch up.
Yeah,
with
so,
holidays,
but you know what?
That's where this is going to go.
We got a lot of time. So.
We had 2 other off-road experiences during this time. In 1990, I went on a business trip to America. Ina and Brian joined me on this trip.
That's an Alpine traveler. I'm an African tourist.
Yes, that's clearly apparent.
Another 40 miles.
Maybe another 40 miles to our first campsite at Modoc Forest. This is sort of a mixture between Lesotho and the Karoo, as you can see by these bushes going past here.
Alan was spending a year working at a ski resort in Tahoe, California.
Well, now we are just about out of the Smoky Creek Desert. That's what it was called.
Now we're into Dusty Creek.
Dusty Creek, Brian says.
we borrowed his 1970s 4x4 Subaru and toured through California, Nevada and Washington State. We of course chose as many secondary roads as we could. We stopped at a gas station in Nevada and were a bit taken aback when a pump attendant said to us, "Y'all been through the desert then?" We looked at each other and burst out laughing. We were covered from head to toe in white dust that had seeped through the badly corroded floorboards.
Sorry, but we're gonna have to maybe wash it inside and out.
We'll just put the hose pipe on it, no? Inside and out.
And the main culprit of this whole thing is over there, where the thing came in, dust came in there. It was a very sad occasion, this dust. Therefore, the whole camp is going to be undusted. You see, everything is very dirty. However, luckily, within our midst is a tap. Behold. This is actually, we got a fire this time.
We bought all our cattle as well.
Tent. Blow up mattresses. Observe the zoot color.
Yes, neon and zoot.
Also, somebody pitching a tent there.
In 1996, I attended a conference in Cairns, Queensland, Australia. Ina went with me, and of course we went snorkeling on the Great Barrier Reef. We also hired a 4x4 camper and did a 1,000 kilometre trip along the coast to Cooktown and then back to Cairns through the outback following farm roads. An interesting experience with forests of bluegums, flocks of lovebirds, budgies and other birds we would only normally see in cages. Ina and I can look back over 40 years of enjoyment with our Land Rovers. We were joined on many of the trips by other Land Rover Owners Club members, many of whom have been mentioned in the stories, and others who were not. All of these people contributed to the excitement and enjoyment of these trips. LROC weekends away and driving weekends were always filled with fun. We met and made many friends at these events. A lot of members have moved on, but many have stayed. There are members who have been our friends for over 40 years. We see them often at social get-togethers. What was often said during Land Rover's 50th celebrations is that there's a golden thread that joins Land Rover enthusiasts together. We can certainly vouch for that.
Now that's what you call a life worth living. Absolutely amazing. I hope that inspires you to get out there and do as much exploring for as long as you can. And if you enjoyed this video, then you must watch the first 3. You'll absolutely love them. It's been an absolute privilege to tell this story and to share these memories with you. And you know, I look at some of the footage and I wish that I had more pictures and especially more video. But I'm actually so lucky and so fortunate that we've got what we've got to be able to tell this story. So I hope you enjoyed it and thank you so much for watching. It's time for me to get out there and go and make some more memories. So until next time, bye.